Welcome to Que Pasa, HSIs, a podcast dedicated to everything Hispanic serving institutions. I'm your host, Dr. Gina Ann Garcia, bringing you the news on what's happening in HSIs. Join us as we explore the history and evolution of HSIs, culturally relevant and liberatory practices, current and emerging research with HSIs, and the policies that shape Servingness.
Saludos HSI familia. Welcome back to Que Pasa HSIs. On season 3, episode 2, we talked about teaching mathematics at HSIs and the importance of changing the mindsets of the faculty who teach mathematics to a population of students of color. Today, we're going to return to that conversation about mathematics servingness and specifically developmental mathematics. Research shows that placing into developmental mathematics often deters math progression and STEM participation, with these outcomes exacerbated for students of color and women. Our nation's community colleges, and especially our Hispanic serving community colleges, are well aware of the structural barriers to persistence and progress that are created when students are placed into developmental mathematics and are actively trying to address the issue. Some states, like California, my home state, have passed legislation to completely remove developmental mathematics. California passed 2 assembly bills, AB 705 and AB 1705, which requires the community colleges to maximize the probability that the student will enter and complete transfer level coursework in English and mathematics within 1 year timeframe, and use high school coursework, high school grades, and high school grade point average for placement rather than other measures, instruments, and placement models. The bill prohibits community college districts from requiring students to enroll in remedial English or mathematics coursework that lengthens their time to complete a degree unless placement research that includes consideration of high school grade point average and coursework that shows that those students are highly unlikely to succeed in transfer level coursework in English and mathematics. These bills actually worked, with data showing that most students are now enrolling in college level mathematics and English, and closed equity gaps in enrollment of these courses. In other words, Black and Latine students are enrolling in college level mathematics and English courses in equitable numbers. But there are also data to show that the completion rates for these courses are not equitable, which highlights the issues of curriculum redesign. Have we adequately created classroom environments and experiences for Latine and Black students to succeed? Today, we're going to talk about mathematics classroom redesign. Our guest on today's episode is Dr. Vanessa Hill, a professor who has spent the last 18 years at Springfield Technical Community College, or STIC, an HSI in Massachusetts. As a STEM educator, her professional passions have always resided in education, especially focused on serving students who are most at risk in navigating the system. Dr. Hill has also been very involved in DEI efforts both at her college and abroad. In addition, she has served as a coach, workshop facilitator, and keynote speaker. I'm excited to learn with and from Dr. Hill today. So, Dr. Hill, let's bring you to the microphone. Thank you for joining us on Que Pasa HSIs, where we talk about all things HSIs. But first, we like to hear about you. So let's start with the famous servingness journey question. Tell us about your servingness journey.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. There's much work to be done, and we've done some really great things. So we always have to keep that in mind as we all work and go through our journey. So I have to tell you, when I first went to college, for a lot of reasons, part of it is just my background and things that were going on in my life. I went to this, which was my dream school. And I was in this auditorium at 18 years old, and I heard the look to your left, look to your right, and one of you will not be here. And I knew it would be me. I knew I wasn't in a place who was willing to welcome me and work with me and support me. And that given what other ordeals I was going through in my life, that this wasn't going to be a successful place for me. And spoiler alert, it was not. I just really, really, really want to go to school, right? So I went to Stick. So that was my first time back at school, Stick, where I currently teach at. And I walked in and I was like, wow, like I had these faculty who were like welcoming and encouraging. And I had this diverse student body. People of all ages were there, even though I was still older, but all different races and ethnicities, and there was different languages that were spoken. And when you walked in the classroom, my personal experience was I had these fabulous, fabulous math professors who were like, "Oh my goodness, you're so good. Like you should go on." And I'm like, "Oh, maybe I'll go be a high school math teacher." And they're like, "No, no." And before they knew about the terminology we use today, like neuroplasticity and representation, they're talking to me. I'm like, "I'm too old for that. I can't go to graduate school for math." And they're like, "Of course you can. You're never too old. Your brain will grow and learn what you need to." And more than that, look around this campus. Our students need you. Like they need to see themselves so that they can broaden the scope they have for their own lives.
Mhm.
So, I'm there and I keep hearing this message and I love math because I just love math. So I was like, well, maybe, right? And then from there, I went to Mount Holyoke to get my bachelor's and I went to UConn to get my master's. So I graduated with my master's degree in mathematics. And that's a whole nother story we could talk about. But and I came back to Stick and I've been there ever since. So when I walk in that classroom, I won a very focused on the fact that I need to make my students feel how my professors at Stick made me feel when I was there. That I'm welcomed, that I belong, that this is a place to succeed and to thrive. It's also a place to honor who you are, like from whatever you're coming in with. That's important. A way that I have no business being in front of a classroom. 'Cause
Mm.
now I'm a detriment. If I'm not walking in like that, I'm just gonna hurt people and hinder their progress. So for me, it's so important to make sure that you walk in that way at all times. So when I was first a student, we were not an HSI, but now we are. And diversity and equity in our classrooms, and then the way we present material, and then the way we present problems is so important to get that buy-in so that students really understand why they're doing the math. I think that's a
Mm.
big thing. They may come in with these aspirations, and the math can be difficult. I'm not saying that it's not, but they are more than capable of mastering the material and moving on given the opportunity. And because it's so important in communities of color for our Black and Latinx students who need that story, who need to see that big picture, if we're not giving them that, it's so disjointed and disconnected, they can't ever see the buy-in for that. And that again, that's a hindrance, right? So
Mhm.
part of what we need to do in serving them is saying, okay, you want to get to here. You want to be a mechanical engineer. You have to take these courses and you may have started a little bit behind, which is fine. We can get you where you need to go, but this is why you need it. And this is what you're going to see in your next course and making
Mhm.
those connections and allowing them the time and the space to fight through difficult material, all the while acknowledging that it can be difficult. And I tell my
Mhm.
students when I first went to college, oh my goodness, it did not work out for me.
Mm.
And they're like, really? Like you have a PhD and you failed out of college? That is exactly what happened. And that didn't define
Yes.
me, right? And I went and I tell them some about my life and my struggles. And I'm like, and if you want to talk more, we can have a whole conversation about this, right? But
Mhm.
just know that just because you come against some walls and some barriers, that's not the end. So
Mhm.
part of my serving story is to be open and authentic and meet folks where they're at and let them bring their own sense of community and what's important into the classroom and be open and free to be themselves. So I think that that's very, very important. And then we became an HSI since I've been working there. And Doc thought it was really important. And he did things like, we're not successful as a college until our faculty and staff represent what our student population look like. Now,
Mhm.
unfortunately, all the gains that he made, we have now lost them, but he was a
Mm.
big proponent of that, And he's like, "We have people here. We have Black and brown people who can do these jobs, and they're just not getting the positions, right?" And so
mm,
he made it mandatory that for every, search committee, there has to be people of color on that search committee, or else it's invalid,
mhm,
and he won't even look at the results, which, people were like, "What? You can't do that." Well, of course he could do that, and he did it, right? So,
mhm,
if you have those people in there who are doing the work, right? And who really are conscious about equity and making sure everybody has the equal opportunity to advance and putting people into positions so that they can continue to grow. Like that's what is serving is all about. And once they have the opportunity, like we have some amazing folks, right? And then
mhm.
given the opportunity, you just let them shine.
Mhm. Yes. Oh, thank you for that. Yes. Now you're already getting into like all of my questions of like structurally, what are y'all doing, right? One of the key things is having a supportive leadership, right? That can change the trajectory of the campus, right? Having a president who commits to this stuff, whoo, it's life changing, right? For campuses, like to have that. So thank you for sharing that and for being so open about your like I failed out of college, right? Like we need to tell those stories. People need to hear that so that they know you can still be successful. And there's this word that's coming up for me, this idea of academic self-concept. And that's a word I've, an outcome I've talked about that like HSIs are actually there's research to show that HSIs do a good job of increasing people's academic self-concept. Right. And you kind of talked
Mhm.
about that, right? That you said that like when you got there it was like embracing like they thought they told you you were smart and you should get a PhD, right? Like that's increasing people's academic self-concept compared to another campus that's like look to your left, look to your right when he was not going to be here. Like that's so deficit, it's so detrimental to students, and the fact that people still do that is detrimental, right? So yeah, HSIs increasing that academic self-concept I think is something we have to think about, right? Is I faculty at HSIs often do commit to that, and community colleges for sure, right? I meet many community college educators that it's like we are so committed to our students and we want them to succeed. So that's beautiful. So let's hear a little bit more about STIC. For our listeners, they know that we talked about the Massachusetts HSI movement in season 5, and STIC is in Massachusetts, right? So I want to know more about the unique context of Springfield Technical Community College, right? Like what is unique about maybe the people or the location, the kind of students, right? The race, the ethnicities, the languages you touched on a little bit, but what makes this work unique from where you're doing it in Massachusetts?
So we are in the western part of the state, and we're in a valley. And there's if you just go up 91 is the corridor that goes up there. We have in Springfield alone, we probably have 10 colleges, and then you move up, and then, so there's just colleges all up and down the corridor. Um,
Mm.
you can throw a rock and hit a college anywhere around here. So it's very much into academics in this area. We are, and like I said, an urban community college. We have a lot of folks who have immigrated to the area. So, we have a Vietnamese population, and we have a lot of different African countries. People have come in, so you'll hear different languages spoken. We have like Portuguese and we have Russian. So we have like a sprinkling of a lot of folks here. We're mainly, though, right now, and I wrote this down, 40% Hispanic student population, 30% white, and 15% Black. So
Mhm.
we have a very brown campus, which is awesome. I enjoy it. But there's probably about 30 languages that you can find that are
Mm,
spoken on this campus. We are the only technical community college in the state.
mm,
So that brings some challenges and it brings so many opportunities. Um, I am a huge STEM proponent. So when I did go back to school after my master's, my PhD is in mathematical education. And my study was like, how do you diversify STEM by looking at developmental math students? So that was my focus, and that's the things that that I've been working on. So trying to get students to buy into, you have to get through these courses so you can be exposed to these very lucrative and in demand fields. So part of
mhm,
our job is to expose them to that. And one of the things that I did in my study is I had my developmental students, I assigned each one a job, like chemical engineer or mechanical engineer or urban planner or air traffic controller, whatever it is, and gave them a website, a couple websites where they looked up the jobs and they saw what the jobs entailed because most of them they had no idea what they're like, I don't know what that mean to be an engineer, right? What is the income? Because they always care about that, right? And then what's the
Mhm.
demand, right? So one thing about Stick being a technical community college, there's so many things that we offer, classes that we offer, that if you want to go into STEM fields, you can get a lot of that foundational work done at Stick, whether you're going to leave with a 2-year degree or transfer.
Mm.
So we have a unique opportunity to with all of our Black and brown population to really expose them to these careers, these lucrative careers,
Mm.
get them internships and get them exposed to things so that they can really make a difference for their family and their community. And we know in the Latinx and the Black community, family is everything. Like, I'm not just
Mhm.
doing this for me, I'm doing this for my family. So
Mhm.
really making those connections and seeing how we know you wanna help your community, and you have just much better chance of helping them and making a difference if you explore some of these other fields that are in high demand and you really can really make a difference. So, I
Mhm.
think that's part of our uniqueness at STEC that I don't think we take as much advantage of as we could, but it is something that we try and keep, like, going back to and hammering that in that this can be life-changing.
Yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, you got me thinking a lot about one thing I talk a lot about is the HSI identity, right? And like how you bring on this new identity. It's a new identity. Like there's all there is to it. None of us were founded as HSIs. There's like a handful, like 2 or 3 campuses in the country that were founded that way, but most HSIs were not founded that way. So how do you stay true to your core identity, right? And you gave us that, right? Like that idea that like we're a technical community college. We're surrounded by other colleges. Massachusetts is fascinating to me because even when I think about the HSI movement and the MSI movement, it's also the birthplace of Harvard, right? Like and some of the most elite institutions in the country, right? Like elite private institutions that aren't opening the doors to Black and brown people. But the HSIs, the emerging HSIs in the state and the community colleges in the state is like, that's where the Black and brown students go, right? That's where our students of color go. So I think Massachusetts is just fascinating in that sense. But then also thinking about your unique identity and how you become a Hispanic serving technical college, right? And you gave some good examples. And I think we need to be reminded that, like, you need to stay true to your identity. You need to stay true to, yeah, that's what we are at our core, right? We're a technical college and we're preparing students who may be only going to come for 2 years and go on into their careers, right? They maybe don't want to transfer. We've got something to offer them that they can go on and get good, lucrative careers in 2 years. And how do we do that as an HSI? So thank you for that. So how did you get involved with the HSI initiatives on campus? I know y'all been doing HSI for a while. I visited Stick in I think 2016 or 2017. I mean, it was a long time ago. So how did you get involved with the HSI initiatives that have been going on for a while now?
So when I first started working at Stick, we were involved in achieving the dream.
Mm,
So there was a big initiative. They had money funding it, and it was about closing equity gaps. So I jumped right on that. As soon as I got to
mm,
campus, I was like, "Wait, what? What? We're gonna do something?" And so at the time, we were looking at the most at-risk students, the one who we're lucky if they stay for a whole semester, right? Usually are not coming back for the second semester, definitely not coming back the following fall. So that was our target. So we looked at these students who were most at risk. They tested into the lowest level of math. And at the time, they may have 3 or more semesters of mathematics before they could ever take a college level math course. So we're a 2-year school and we're talking about their second year, they're still taking developmental. And so maybe their third year, they might get into their major
mhm,
classes. So to look at this, we redesigned our again, these are the ones placing at the absolute lowest level, and they have a lot of math anxiety. They're coming in and they're feeling imposter syndrome and not and really having a really hard sense of belonging to the college. So it was a 4 credit course we designed for these students, and it was like its own learning community. We met 4 to 5 times a week, depending on the schedules, and redesigned the curriculum so it was more like project and problem based. So students had an opportunity to really like work through the mathematics, right? They're not just kind of memorize something to solve a problem, but we're putting it in context. We have them working together in small groups. And what we found was these students absolutely created their own learning community. If somebody was out of
Mhm.
class, I never had to say anything to anyone because they'd be on the phone like, "Where are you?" They'd be calling each other out, and I'm like, "Mm." And so they held each other accountable, and I got to know them. All of us who taught these classes got to know them really well. We knew about their families, we knew about their kids, um, and they knew we really cared about them, and they were successful. So again, these are the ones who more than likely weren't gonna finish the semester, and 90 we found that, like, 90% of them not only finished the semester, but they passed their subsequent math course. So this was, like, amazing, right? But unfortunately, as soon as achieving the dream money ran out, they're like, "We're not funding that," right? So
Mm.
and I'm like,
Mhm.
"But look how great, like, look, we affected these people's lives, and they came back and they were successful." I had one student who went through started with, like, the pre-algebra, the lowest level, and he's like, I'm terrible," and eventually he's a PA now,
Mm.
right? A young
Mhm.
Hispanic man who went from, "I can't do this," to you could see him gaining, like as he gained more knowledge, he was just like he just walked differently, right? Like, he had this thing like, "I know I can do this," right? His confidence kept building, and he was super smart. When he walked through the door, he was really smart, he just didn't know he was really smart. And
Mm.
so I'm like, but having us work together and having his classmates work, and then, he became my unofficial TA in the class, like, I'm like, "Come on, I need you to help me because I can only talk to so many people at a time." But it became that kind of situation that was really meaningful, and it built friendships that I know some of those folks still talk to each other, right? Putting the cost on it, and I get it, like, I'm on a budget, like, to take into account, like, why are we here? Like, what's our goal?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
trying so if you can't really fully fund that, even though we were only running a few sections because there was only a small, like, less than 100 students that we'd bring in each semester to do it, but what are you replacing that with? And if you just replace it with nothing, then you're going back to exactly what we had before, which is what happened,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Mhm. Mhm. Mm. That happens often, right? Like, we get these funds, we get these grant funds, we launch these cool initiatives. It works. We actually show evidence of it working, right? It sounds like you have that evidence of it working, and then
Yes.
the funding goes away, and we never institutionalized it, right? What a the most important piece of us trying something new is the institutionalization, and we keep not doing that part, which is
Exactly, and we put out some options, like, okay, if you're saying it's too expensive for a faculty to run this. I get it, faculty are expensive. We could run it with, like, our professional tutors and have faculty come in, but keep that same cohort together. And,
Mhm.
and ideas so that and then it was just like a it can be so demoralizing sometimes when you're like,
Mhm.
"But I believe in this, and you know what? I'll hold my office hours in there. You don't even have to pay me. I'll come in twice a week during these times so that they stay together." And it's just, it's like, be creative. We're trying to be creative. Be creative so that
Mhm.
we can make sure that we're supporting our students. And then it takes on a life of its own, right? After you get some roots there, and it just continues, and word of mouth, and students come back to help, which is why I love the
Mhm.
SI program. I'm like,
Mhm.
once you really start getting that
Mm.
buy-in, then it
Mhm.
really can, like, start to be sustainable, but you gotta give it some time to do that.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Oh, this is exactly the conundrum with HSI funding too, right? I know you were talking about it was through Achieve the Dream, but the HSI funding of, like, yes, like, you have 5 years to do something innovative, but then it's going to start to take root, right? And it's going to, like, start to take on its own life. But you got to keep watering it, or it's going to die, right? In the
Mhm.
end, if we don't actually institutionalize it, right, and make sure it, like, progresses. So
Right. So that was my first delve into it. And again, it was all like we started out with the data, which was great because at the time we had a great IR department. And they're like, look, this is what's happening, right? So this is our justification of moving forward. So that was the first one. But through the years, I've been involved with practically anything that comes up. And our department is pretty awesome because like I just get frustrated and bored sometimes and I'll be like, okay, you know what? Let's try this. And everyone's like, "Okay, we'll try it." And our department is really invested in getting our students through and helping them be successful, not just getting them passed through this course, but getting that foundation so that they can go on and proceed and grow. So we're pretty good about like, I can't believe how bad this class has been and my success rate is horrible and let's brainstorm. So even
Mhm.
without initiatives, like we would get together and like I'm really unhappy about what I'm seeing. And so what
Mm.
do you think? You know, what do you
Mhm.
think? What can we do? And working together and bouncing ideas off of each other. And I don't think well, I know I wouldn't still be at that college if my department wasn't like that.
Mm.
'Cause I fight with administration a lot. And sometimes I'm just like, I can't anymore. But then when you have a department who's like, "Well, we're gonna do this anyways," then I'm like, "Okay." You know, all right, I'll get over this.
Yeah, your home, as long as your home is nice and tidy, the home
Yeah.
department. Yeah, you can
Mhm.
withstand some other things. That's awesome. Okay, so I built up this whole idea of like you're redesigning developmental math, right? As I brought us into the intro. So let's talk about that, right? Like talk about some of that work that you're doing around redesigning developmental mathematics. What was the impetus and like did you get a grant and what are you doing with that?
So, like I said, the previous courses were not absorbed because of cost. We
Mhm.
continued to look at the inequities, and we found that Black and Hispanic students were enrolled in upper level courses at a much lower rate. And then in the developmental courses, it's like a flip flop, right? So
Mhm.
I could walk into a classroom and know exactly what level it was.
Mhm.
If I have like a developmental algebra course, it's going to be 90% Black and Hispanic. And if I had walk into my calculus course, it's going to be 90% white.
Mm.
So we really were looking at like what can we do? And even on top of that, if you looked at grade wise, right? The white students are always outperforming the students of color no matter what level they are. That's actually when I went back and did my dissertation, when I went back and started looking at how we can bring equity in there and move the needle so students are enrolling at a higher level. On the state level, we took a look at the GPA. So, what you're referring to with California, we've done some of that work in Massachusetts. And if a student is exempt from the placement, if they've graduated in the last 3 years with at least a 2.7, um, and then we looked at we're right now looking at some other measures so students can we can move the needle a bit more. So we are looking at placement as well as the
Mhm.
courses, the developmental courses, and I'll get into my full development in a second because that's the one I did with the Foundation Innovation Fellowship that we'll talk about in a second. But so we looked at the placement levels. One thing that I did with placement is we redid the placement, what we use for placement. Before it was like this one test, you had one shot, and that's you get what you get.
Mhm.
We're using different platform that's better job placing, and you have up to 5 attempts of taking it. So let's
Mhm.
say you want to enroll in the fall. A lot of students come in the spring and they do the initial like placement and get their financial aid office and do all that stuff. It allows you to go and review the material, like take the placement, review the material, and then retake it. And then you're guaranteed not to fall in placement. So, like if you were having a bad day and you decide to take it and you actually do worse, that wouldn't count against you. Our goal is to have them place everybody place out of developmental education. That would be great. But some folks really need it, right? And so we also, like they found in California, we don't want to just be putting people in these college level courses and setting them up for failure.
Mhm.
Um, our average age it's getting younger now with the free community college, but our average age for a while was like 28. So
Mm.
you have some folks coming in right from high school, but you also have the 50-year-olds coming back to school
Mm-hmm.
who haven't had a math class in 25 years. So, and then you're going to say, "Oh, you're fine. Just go jump in."
Mm-hmm.
If they have the aptitude and they want to do it, but take for any of that, and they can, move up. And then the
Mm-hmm.
ones who are like, "I really need to sit in a classroom with a teacher and really go through this and have
Mm-hmm.
somebody support me," then we have that as well. Um, Massachusetts is pushing to remove all developmental education. Our college is pushing hard for it, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
pushing back because
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think it's fair for everybody. Like, I don't think you can
Mm-mm.
make these blanket statements.
Mm-mm.
And
Mm-mm.
people need it, and it gives us the opportunity to help build them up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not
Yeah.
only with the math, but letting them know you belong here, and it's great that you came
Mm-hmm.
back to school, and, we're here to support you, and this is what I owe you as a faculty member, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times they come in, "Well, the teacher said," and some things you hear, and I'm like, "Okay, that's just not right. They can't just do that."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I talk about my responsibilities to my students as well as their responsibilities, right? I put myself on the line just like everybody else. I'm going to hold myself accountable, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because if I'm not here supporting you, again, I'm not doing my job. I shouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For
So we
sure.
go through those things and build those relationships. And I think that there's definitely a place for that. We don't want, 40% of our students tested in developmental because we see that that doesn't work either.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at placements and looking at making sure that you're doing check-ins to say, "You know what? You might not have done that well in the placement, but I see, like, I'm giving you this pretest and I see you did really well. So I think we need to move you up while ad drop is still open so it's not even a big deal." Right? So
Right.
putting as many mechanisms in place to try and make sure folks are in the right place in the right class and given the opportunities to get up into their major classes as soon as possible is what we really should be focused on. And that is
Mm-hmm.
so that's again a lot of the work that my department's been doing, not just me,
Mm-hmm.
but our department as a whole.
Yeah. Thank you for giving us that, and I think you really bring to light some of the complexities, like I talked about with the California example, and the whole idea of like what California does, right? Like there were changes. Like yes, now people are enrolling. Black and Latino students are immediately enrolling in that college level math course, but it's put a tremendous amount of pressure on math faculty, and not all math faculty are your department, so they're not doing anything, and those students are entering courses that are not for them because they're not ready, right? They need that something, right? That developmental piece. So it's complicated. I think you've given us this picture of like a broad sweeping policy isn't necessarily the best approach, right? Like there has to account for people's individual needs, right? And how do you do that
Absolutely.
while
We
also
like to re
addressing? Mhm, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. We like to refer to it as mathematical maturity.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
when we talk about it, like, okay, they just need a minute. Just give them a minute, and then we can get them
Mhm.
along. Because it's not like they're not can't handle it. Like they'll be able to get the work. Just give them a minute to get ready to be able to do the work without
Mm.
just throwing them in there.
Yeah, I like that. The mathematics maturity. Yeah, so like you got to account for that, right? Like that we need to allow for that. No, the other thing I was going to say was while also accounting for what you said, which was I think really powerful, and we're in this anti-DEI crisis right now, right? Like pushback, and we don't need like to think specifically about the needs of Black and Latino students, of students of color. But you said, and you gave an example that's like, okay, my developmental math class, 90% Black and Latino, my algebra course, or my, what'd you say, calculus course, right? Calculus course, 90% white, right? Like there's the example of why these mechanisms, right? They're not being racist to their, or whatever we're being told that DEI is. It's actually accounting for inequity. The inequities are real. We know they're real, but me and you know that. And everybody listening to this podcast knows that. The alt-right, ultra conservatives are not listening to my podcast. And if they were, they'd probably be trying to shut me down. So let's hope they don't catch wind. But we know that, right? And it was such a good example of like, this is why we have to have these ways to address the inequities, right? And you gave us such a good example. So I wanted to like put an exclamation point on that because it matters a lot. So yes, I love the complexity of this conversation for people that are listening and thinking about, developmental education is it's a huge conversation, right? And particularly in the community colleges. All right, so let's get into the Foundation Innovation Fellowship that you got. And that was the fellowship that you got to actually do the reform, right, to developmental mathematics. So tell us about the fellowship and what you did and what you accomplished.
Okay, so even though I'm not always on best terms of my administration, but I work really hard for our students. So the president came to me and he said, "Well, the way developmental math is set up is not working." And I agree. Like I definitely wholeheartedly agree. I've read the articles and you've talked about it, how students they get in that developmental rut and they don't get through. So I know that this is an issue. And I also know there's a place for it. So he wanted me to redo it instead of like the 3 semester developmental sequence to make 1 credit modules, and the students can complete everything in 1 semester. My goal is to have everybody take a college level course in their first year at the college. So what I did was I took a year and I took the topics that we really had to have. Like math people, everything is so important to us because everything is so important and I love it all. But okay, they don't really need to know how to factor to take statistics. Like they really don't need that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Class and they have fulfilled their college level math course. And again, you can take multiple ones in 1 semester if you're capable. Um, the second module, there's some algebra kind of stuff in there that the folks in like the printing and graphic arts want to make sure their students have. So you can either test out of it, or if you do, you need to finish that second module. Then you can take those courses that, for your major. So it really shortened it. And every single course, every single major across the whole campus, we redid the pathways. And now most of our students never have to go through like an algebra 2 type because none of them need it for their major. STEM
Mm.
folks do, right? So that is the group that has to go through module 3 and 4. And 4, we also looked at the high school curriculum while I was redoing this.
Mm.
Just they have they made up all these different strange. But if you wanted to go into STEM, you need to know some trigonometry and logarithms and things like that. So that 4th module, it's very short, but it's an introduction to trig and logarithms. So students who have never seen it, when they go into a tech math class or a pre-calculus class, this is not the very first time that they're seeing this.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives us some time to really put a little bit of foundation. Most of our suburban kids have gone through pre-calculus at least when they come in,
Mm-hmm.
but we found that a lot of the urban schools, they don't cover that same material. That class, they're like, "Whoa, I've never seen this before," right?
Mm.
So what we did, and it shortened the pathways immensely. I wish I had the data. IR, I said before it was a really robust department. There's like 2 people now. And
Mm.
anecdotally, what I've seen is I think we've made great progress to having them have that college level course in the first year, but, it's mainly just the stuff that I've tracked myself because ever since I've been in a Scala, I am really on my equity indexes, and I track all that stuff very, very carefully, but I wish I had a more, widespread, but from talking to my colleagues and what I've seen myself, they are definitely getting in and getting that college level course on a much higher rate. From my
Mm-hmm.
own what I've seen from past before we did the redesign, I think it's up to at least about 30%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. So the president actually sort of enabled you to do that work, right? Like, or tapped you for that to
He
do that
tapped
work.
me for it, yeah, and his goal, like I said, is to just get rid of developmental, and so that's what we fight about now. I'm like, "No."
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
they keep telling me that I don't really have a title, like, I argue with the vice president of academic affairs, and he's like, "But I'm the vice president of academic affairs." So he can kinda do what he wants, but I'm like, "I'm still gonna yell about it," so
You're like, I'm still the expert in the room on mathematics.
I'm like,
That
"Really?"
part.
That part.
Yes, like you are the expert on it. So Sounds like y'all are doing good work. And like I said, really thinking intentionally about the just the various dimensions of this work, right? Like we can't, it is hard to just do a broad sweeping sort of approach to this. So you mentioned a Scala. You are a facilitator for a Scala Educational Services and specifically for their CTL HSI course and their STEM X course. So tell us about your work and how you got involved with a Scala, who I absolutely adore. I love a Scala too. So tell us about that work.
So I first went to CTL in 2017, and I have done work with them ever since. Like, I went down there and I just had, like, the biggest crush on Melissa because I was like, "I've never heard anybody talk like this before." I actually heard her speak first at, conference in Vegas. I forget, it might have been Aussie, I'm not sure.
Aussie. Aussie.
Yeah,
I was
and so
there.
and I was like, I just went to this talk, this woman, and I can't believe what she was saying, right? And so then I went to CTL, and I'm in this professional development, and we were out in New Mexico, in Espanola is where I went,
Mhm.
and I'm just like, "This is the best ever." So, Espanola, there's not much in Espanola, but it's beautiful out there. But I'm in these talks all day, and they're making us do homework, and we're working really hard, and she's saying these things that I'm like, "Oh my goodness," I feel like, I know we were talking about, Latinx students, but really we're talking about minoritized students, right? And
Mhm.
so and it was, like, earth-shattering to me for our students, right? Our
Mhm.
students and how we can do things differently and how I thought like, I work really hard for my students, but I'm like, whoa, I don't think I bring enough of myself into the room
Mhm.
because before in Scotland, I'm like, oh no, they're just, I'm just going to be Professor Hill and I'm just going to do the math. I presented it in different ways, but as far as me, myself, I was very like, no, that's just not what you do. Go and you be
Mhm.
professional. And not that I'm not professional, but I was very closed off as far as that was concerned. And I'm like, how do I expect my students to feel open and welcome and bring their whole authentic self into the room? And I don't do it myself, right?
Mhm.
And so I went to this PD and I was like, I could have stayed like another month and gone through it over and over again because I'm like writing notes and I'm like, this is amazing. It's amazing. And then as a facilitator, every time I go through as a facilitator, I'm like, oh yeah. Like I pick up something new. I'm like, you know what? I need to change that in my class. And it keeps putting me in touch with who my students are and reconnecting with them because one student group is very different than the next, right? So it's
Mhm.
not some generalization, but making sure I'm always checking in with myself and with my students to make sure that I keep that connection and that I'm growing all the time and I don't become stagnant,
Mm.
in my own work. But it just blew me away. And I'm like, that whole team was just amazing. And every time I get to work with them, I just get so excited and so happy about it because it's just a great I wish everybody would go through.
Mhm.
Absolutely everybody should go through
Mhm.
because it really does, like, stop you in your tracks and make you do
Mhm.
some work and check in on yourself, right? So,
Mhm.
it's just amazing. So I can't say enough about it, and really it really does change things, and it changes you, and
Mhm.
it benefits your students, it benefits your colleagues.
Mhm.
'Cause, we have some conversations, I'll be like, "Mm."
Mm.
Like, I'm the only Black person in the room, but I'd be like, "Wow,
Mm.
that was awfully, white." Like,
Mm.
how do y'all feel about it? Like, talking to my colleagues, I'm like, "So this is okay?" Like, and people are like, "Oh, I never thought about it this way." And I'm like, "How do you think
Mhm.
somebody brown walking in the room would feel with this?" And so
Mhm.
we have some serious conversations, um, and I think that it's helped and benefit, everyone who's touched by it. I think it just kinda,
Mhm.
like, spreads.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then, and I was like, "That one thing, okay, just think about one thing because you get overwhelmed. Think about that one thing. Let's start with that one
Mhm.
thing."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you bring up a really important one thing that people, it's actually seems like an easiest thing, which is like be your authentic self in the classroom, right? Like it should be easy, but you're right. We aren't trained to do that. Well, faculty, of course, we know at colleges, universities, we're not trained to teach in general. So we just sort of do what we've been taught, what we've seen, and faculty don't bring them whole selves, right? But what a
Mhm.
powerful, like, if that's the first thing you do is like, you know, bring your whole self to the room, like that matters. That matters to the students. I had a student yesterday in my after class and came up to me and was like, when you asked us if we had a faculty member that looked like us at UC Berkeley prior to now, until you said that, I didn't realize that you were the first one, right? You were the first Latina that I had standing in front of the classroom, teaching. And they don't think about it until you tell them that, right? But when we bring our full authentic selves, they're like, that matters, right? That matters wholly to be ourselves, and that they're more willing to open up to us. So I love that. What about other like tips for anybody listening, math faculty, besides bring your whole self to the room? Bring yourself, your racialized, your gendered, your social identities to the room, right? We know that's basic, like good culturally relevant pedagogies. But what other tips for math faculty that maybe from the STEMX course that you
So
can
I would
offer
say
us?
don't teach math the way you were taught it.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are like, it's math. Like, none of this stuff has anything to do with us because math is math. Yes, math is beautiful and it is also weaponized, those who
Mm-hmm.
can and those who cannot.
Mm.
I remember being in graduate school in measure theory, which is like the worst course. This analysis course is terrible. And someone's like, well, if you can't get this, then you don't belong here. And I'm like, this is measure theory. It is hard. Like, so you have to you don't want to change the math and you want to be in a position where you have very high expectations about the math, but you want to be accessible. You want to let I talked earlier about how, we tried to build these learning communities in the classes. I do that whether it's a lot of contact hours or a little contact hours. I can contribute, right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to hear that one voice, right? I want the students to feel that they are community and they're there to learn some difficult material and learn and master it, right? No, I don't want these C student thing. No, I want you to master this material. So when you move on, you can be ready to master the next thing, right? So I want a very high level of understanding and I want them to build it together and be in support of each other. They should be helping each other along and in no way in competition with each other.
Mm.
Right? I
Mm.
don't want them
Got it.
thinking that whoever said they got the question right first or got the highest grade, that's great. Like, no. How did this help this body of knowledge that we're building? So as a teacher walking in, I would say kind of question all of the way that you were taught math growing up. Because
Mm.
I instantly, like, I don't want that. So in your classroom, in that space, what does your space feel like to your students? If I ask them, would they tell you, well, she's tough, but she gives us an opportunity to really work with the material and to learn it and to show that we mastered it and to help each other and we work together. Like those are the kind of things I want my students to say, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so when you're teaching math, stop pretending like it is so antiseptic because it's not.
Mm.
And take the time to try and make those connections. We know if you read articles about transfer, it's one of the hardest things for students to do, transfer what they learn from one class to another class. I try
Mm-hmm.
and facilitate that because really most students don't become experts at that until they go to graduate school, right? That's when they really start being
Right.
really good at transfer. Until then, they're really not, right? So I want to facilitate that, and I want folks to think about that when they're teaching, and not make these preconceived notions like, oh my goodness, they did so terrible in that first test, they might as well drop this class. Like that's not what you're there for. Find
Mm-mm.
out why they did so bad on that first test. And what are you going to help them put in place so that they can be successful moving forward?
Mm-hmm.
If math, especially most of our courses, not all of them, one concept is built on top of another. How are you going to help them to resolve that so that they don't have that same issue moving forward? and help them master that what they struggled with, right?
Mhm.
I'm teaching calculus and we've done limits and now I'm talking about continuity. And if they never got limits, they are not getting continuity. I need to go
Mhm.
back. How are we going to work together to get them so then they can say, oh, I can't believe that was hard for me, right? I get it now, right?
Mm.
Okay, now you show me you master that. And that grade is not going to haunt you for the rest of the semester. This is not like
Right.
a doomed. I still hear faculty say, "Oh, if you failed my first exam, drop the class," or if you look, you're great at midterm, drop the class.
Mm.
Not my job. That's not my job.
Mm-mm.
Not my job. So I would
Mhm.
just push them to get out of your comfort zone. Keep in mind, we are here not to judge, but to help them master the material
Mhm.
and building that community and giving them that opportunity. I would highly encourage you to do that, and take your own equity assessment. Look at your class. Look at who's getting
Mhm.
A's, B's, C's, D's, F's. Break
Mhm.
it down by gender. Break it down by race and ethnicity. What is your equitable practice in your classes? What are you seeing in your own
Mhm.
classes? Because it can be
Mhm.
very enlightening.
Mm. Yes, the equity indexes that you talked about. Yes, do that. Thank you for all of that, those words of advice. And if people want more, don't forget to enroll in Escala's STEM X course for more from Dr. Hill on how to do this better, right? Particularly in a STEM environment. Because some of the things you're talking about, I think it is different in a STEM environment versus like, I'm in a social sciences area, but the idea that you have to master one thing before you can go to the next is big, right? In STEM, obviously. And we have to account for that, right? In thinking about how do we be better at engaging, right, students of color. But that's
Mhm.
key. That's a key essential piece of it. Awesome. So I had recently had Doctora Elisa Castillo and Julissa Colon on the podcast talking about the HSI movement in New England. How have you been involved with the movement in Massachusetts as the state moves now towards being an HSI MSI state?
So I haven't been involved with these wonderful. I was so impressed to tell you. I was like, wow, maybe I shouldn't get one. But I've been colleges are going for the HSI designation. So funds it's hard. It's hard to get that
Mhm.
money. Right now, we
Mhm.
have a couple different grants for HSI. One is a HSI STEM, which I am heavily involved with in my college. But it's been at the forefront. We have DESE, which is the Department Ed of Elementary and Secondary Education. Sorry, I always forget that. Part of their, what they put out for their initiatives is to eliminate, equitable gaps based off of race and ethnicity. So it is a really big push in the state. And I also had the honor of working with Dr. Carlos Santiago, who was our last commissioner of higher ed for Massachusetts. I was on the statewide task force where we developed a strategic plan for racial equity.
Mm,
And that was a very illuminating process, right? And there's
mm,
folks from all over the state and different we had students on there and faculty and presidents and trustees and it was really a very cool experience. I'm glad I got to experience it. And then out of this document, he Dr. Santiago was not for play. He wanted some hard things in there. Now, I don't
mm,
think he got everything he wanted, but he was like, "Well, when you're evaluating college presidents, then we should hold back funds. And they're equitable. Have they closed their equity gap? If not, that should be
mhm,
part of their evaluation process. And if they're not closing it or if it's expanding, they need to be called to the state and stand up here and answer, why is it that you're not making any progress? Right? He wanted to put some hard things in there, and I was so impressed with it. And so Massachusetts as a whole has really, really been pushing the HSIs and closing equity gaps in both the K through 12 as well as the college level. Community college is a big focus because that's where a lot of our students of color come first, right? They're at
mhm,
the community college, and I'd read this one study that community colleges, a student of color whether it leaves a community college with a much higher efficacy than if they were to go to a 4-year college first, right?
Mm,
So we're
mm,
not saying we always have the best outcomes all the time, but there is something about being in this space, being around your people in your space, right? That helps build you up. And I think that our leadership realizes that. So not only is it important to be an HSI, right? But make it known, make
mhm,
it clear, and be open about the fact that you're an HSI. Make sure that there's a place to go. Folks can go and congregate and just, hang out. And
mhm,
it should be clear all over the place that this is a welcoming place, most especially in the classroom, but there should be like a center and other place that you can go and collaborate with your classmates or, staff and faculty so that you really feel like, this is a place that you can call home.
mhm. Yes, thank you for that. You absolutely are part of the movement. Totally part of the movement. Even if you weren't involved with with the women that were on the podcast the previous season, all of this is part of the movement, right? You're doing the work at Stick, right? And that is does make you part of the movement. And I gotta say, what lucky for us, for you, for me, we are in those states that are still supportive of equity, right?
Yes.
And this new administration wants to put education back into the states. Well, states like ours are going to be, it's going to be okay because we have states and leaders that are committed to equity work, right? Luckily, but there's so many states that don't have that, right? So it's like, well, well, gonna have to lean into the fact that we at least there are states, right, that are still completely committed to this, and I know Massachusetts is one of them. So I know this work is going to
Mhm.
continue, right, regardless of what happens with the Department of Ed or whatever, right? Like we know that this work is going to continue for y'all. And I'm excited about that because y'all are doing such good work. So, final question. ¿Qué pasa HSIs? How do you respond to that question? What's up HSIs? How do you respond?
My response is, and especially in today, right, where you talked about there's a lot of stress about what's going to happen. What I have to say is we have too many people entrenched, passionate, and convicted to allow our work to be in vain. Keep up the good fight, and you're doing a good fight, so rest easy.
Yes, and that's what's up. Thank you for joining me today on ¿Qué pasa HSIs?